to talk if I can. Just
sure.
It's
fire away.
A lot of it's ground, obviously, you've gone over. You'll pardon me, but for the purposes
of
what
I'm
doing here, one question that,
You're running?
Yeah, we're running now. And anytime you want to stop, just tell me.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
One question. I was sitting as the head of Warner Brothers Records in the 60s, and along you guys came. And then in doing these interviews, more and more people I talked to, they say they were doing this, and then they heard the Beatles. Were you guys aware of the impact you had on musicians around the world?
Not at first. We were aware of all the kind of the musical establishment. We were aware of them, and we wanted them to be aware of us. Lennon McCartney, the whole idea of calling it Lennon McCartney instead of Paul Lennon and John McCartney, the other way around, was kind of after Rodgers and Hammerstein. It was a writing partnership, and we were kind of modelling ourselves on the establishment, really, even though we were coming from a pop rock and roll thing. So I think at first, we were aware more of them than they were of us. But as I say, when I wrote something like Yesterday, it was a kind of aim, really, was to impress people who knew music rather than just the teeny boppers. We kind of written a few songs like that, simple teeny bopper stuff, which I like and that. But you always you'd be around musicians, you'd be around orchestras, you'd do a gig. There was a Northern Dance Orchestra up in Manchester. They were all the guys like we were listening to before, the brass players and the hardened guys who Sinatra would play with if he ever got that far up north, kind of thing. It was the top boys. And you'd always hang out with them a little bit and have jokes. And you always wanted to be respected in their eyes, because we sort of had the other respect. We had the kids' respect, and we had the youth market. But you wanted kind of good people like that to sort of know about you. But it took a long time for us to actually realise that we'd got through. I think we got through in a way by default, because at first I think a lot of people, it was just, what's the song, The Immovable Object and the Irresistible Force. We were the irresistible force that was not going to be stopped, just in a popular sense. We'd kind of captured Liverpool, we'd captured London. It was like a military campaign. I mean, we were out to capture the world. So by the time we'd sort of made it in America, you were finding people I know Harold Arlen feels, a lot of people felt like the Beatles spoiled their thing. We changed the whole ball game. So a lot of people up until then who'd been writing sort of nice songs that occasionally would hit in the same way as they'd always done, found that some of these nice songs were no longer in the style that was acceptable. So it was this big sort of irresistible force that kind of made them all look at the whole thing again. Ed Sullivan was having us on, whereas it used to be more of a Streisand or somebody who'd head the bill. Now you were getting this little sort of, these kids, this little group of kids. And at first I think a lot of them just said, nuts, they'll be gone tomorrow, like all the kid rock and roll groups. This is Frankie Avalon here. This is Fabian. It's a group. It's Fabian in a group. So, they weren't too worried. But we knew they ought to be worried. We knew this was an irresistible force. We knew we had quite a bit of momentum by the time. Because we'd played Hamburg. A lot of the older people, you see, forget that. They thought they had the vaudeville training. They had to work without microphones. They had to work hard. And us little kids were overnight sensation. We weren't. We worked 8 hours a day in Hamburg. Now, 8 hours a day for any musician is a lot of playing. And you've got to, if you don't want to repeat in that 8 hours, you've got to have some repertoire. 8 hours of repertoire. And we managed it. By the end of our stay in Hamburg, we managed, albeit slimly. I mean, there were tequila might take on a couple of versions to qualify, But by the time we'd sort of done the whole thing, we'd come back from Hamburg with a repertoire. Big bag full of swag. Because it was all B-sides, all blues tunes. It was stuff that people hadn't heard. A lot of stuff we'd written ourselves. A lot of, as I say, B-sides of hits that we knew were good songs and that we'd worked them around. Little offbeat things we'd heard off albums. But we selected this big sort of repertoire. Very varied, so we could go anywhere and play something. If we were in an older people's crowd, we were playing a cabaret, I'd do Taste of Honey. or Till It Was You. I'd do that kind of thing. And so I think eventually this kind of showed through, that grounding there. Because we did feel a bit envious at first. You get the older performers saying, oh, we had music hall, we had vaudeville, which is one of the big things you'd always hear, and you kids don't. So we said, well, if we've got this repertoire. So when we came to record, we'd pull things out of this repertoire. I did Till It Was You. I don't think we ever did Taste of Honey. No, I don't think. I think we did it. Yeah, we did it. It was an album track. That's right. But it never got a lot of attention. But so we had this kind of other side to us that was a little more than people thought we had. So you get the older entertainers kind of saying, "No, well, this won't last long." But then the kids they'd say, "What do you like about these guys?" They said they don't write any tunes and stuff. And the kids would be able to say, "Well, wait a minute, listen to this." And they put on yesterday with a little string quartet, which people like Andy Williams, coming from the correct school, as it were, inverted commas, would say, oh, the voicing's all wrong on the violins. Which, listening to it now, it's a strange voicing on that record. But to us at the time, it was this musical respectability that we knew we had. And we'd have these kind of, because we were based in that. People forget that. My dad was a musician. He used to have a little band called Jim Mack's Band in the 20s when he was 20-odd himself. And he'd be at home, he'd be playing Lullaby of the Leaves, he'd be playing, so I always knew that tune and loved that tune, which not a lot of people these days know that tune. You'll know it. Lee Eastman knows it. The older crowd know it. And the music buffs know it. But it's not everyone. That'll go off in a second, I hope.
Okay, that's all right.
I must get an attachment so it isn't. John, for instance, Don't Blame Me was one of John's favourite songs. John Lennon. Now, you don't know that kind of stuff about John. You just think he's a kind of a peacenik or whatever you think he is. He's a crazy man or whatever, or a great man of this or that. But you don't associate him with that stuff. But again, his mum taught him. His mum was a musical lady, taught him banjo chords. I had to change him to guitar chords because he knew it all banjo style, the two strings now. But we used to love Little White Lies, Don't Blame Me. These are our big favourites. Rosetta. These are songs that we used to love. Like, man, I was a big Fats Waller fan. I was a big Peggy Lee fan. My very good friend, the Milkman, was like one of my favourites. We used to do very early days in this repertoire. I'm talking about. We used to do Bésame Mucho. So we used to do all sorts of stuff that no one would ever have suspected us. So that when we did play with these NDOs or the Sullivan Band, these guys, who we wanted to be on that level. We didn't want to just be the little schmucks from out of town and these be the real boys. We didn't just want fame, we wanted credibility as well. So that was it. We did have this quite big backlog that we could draw on. And I was writing songs like When I'm 64. When I was 16, funny you should mention Sinatra before, because I kind of wrote that with him in mind when I was 16. Right, because rock and roll hadn't actually happened when we started. It was just about to happen, and we were about to make it happen very big, about to sort of turn it into a major industry, whereas it had been Elvis and Chuck Berry obviously making it. They'd made it pretty major by then anyway.
Well, up until you guys did it, there had been no English rock and roll. I mean, Tommy Steele and something.
There had been bits and pieces, yeah.
But why all of a sudden? Why did this floodgate come? And we got overwhelmed in the States with rock and roll bands.
Well, because we opened the gate. I think if we hadn't opened the gate, I think what was to come after it wouldn't necessarily have hit. But I put it down myself. People dispute this, but hell, I was there, so they can dispute it as much as they like, I say that the cheekiest thing the Beatles ever did was say to our manager, we don't want to go to America till we're number one. We made that stipulation. I'll tell you why. Because we have an artist over here called Cliff Richard, who's one of the big British stars. Tommy Steele, as you mentioned. Adam Faith. Cliff's a nice guy and everything. But he'd been to America, and he'd been like about third or fourth on the bill to Frankie Avalon, Fabian, and who knows, topped the bill. But it was that kind of a bill, rock and roll package tour. The British guy coming. And we'd seen him come back, and we'd seen his interviews. We were just a little younger than Cliff. He's a year or two older, which made all the difference in your teenage years. It's a big gap. He'd come back, and we'd read his interviews, and he'd say, I had a great time over there, terrific, and I played a lot of gigs. And we'd kind of we'd say to ourselves, but he's not a hit. He's a major star. He's like Elvis over here. He's not making it over there. Then Adam Faith went over, Tommy Steele went over. And we'd see them all come back kind of saying, oh, I had a great time. It was wonderful, wonderful. But we'd wait. Well, where's the big number one hit then? You know, if they had a wonderful time, surely the Americans are going to be buying their records. But it never proved to be true. They were just a little European act who'd got a bit too out of their depth, gone and done a tour, not meant an awful lot, come back, and then they were stars again when they came back here. So because of this, we'd seen this just for too long, about 2 years too much we'd seen this happening. So we said, well, we're not going to be another in that line. We said, we just don't want to go over. Don't book us third or fourth on a bill. We said, don't even think of booking us till we got a number one. And we actually, the arrogance, the sheer arrogance of a little bum group, not even from London. You know, we're a complete sticks group. But we had enough savvy to just say, don't bother. Because we were huge in Liverpool. And we were huge in England, and we didn't want to come down a step. We wanted to be huge wherever we went. We didn't want to come. We didn't want to go to the small hotels now. We were on and up. We were on a roll, and so we had the sense to say a couple of us, all of us actually had quite good sort of street sense. We weren't the stupidest of groups. John was art college. Me and George were grammar school.
What did everybody bring to the table? What was the chemistry?
Within the group.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an impossible question to really answer, but I'll have a stab at it for you. John brought a biting wit, which was lacking in everything everybody else did. If you talk to Cliff this afternoon, you won't find a lot of biting wit. He's a nice guy, but you won't find a true wit. You won't find any Lenny Bruce there. But in John, there was a lot of Lenny Bruce. There was that kind of serious wit. We didn't want to be the same as anyone, so there was a desire to be different, which I think we all contributed on that one. John, certainly, a lot on that. I think I brought a commerciality. I think I have an ability to be commercial. I kind of feel like I know what people like a lot of the time. You can't be commercial all the time. But I had looked at show business from afar and sort of thought that record's going to be a hit, and it would be. I could sort of pick them and spot them and sort of knew what people would want. So I think I sort of helped there a lot. When John and I started writing, I'd be keen that we always got a very good title and things like that. I brought harmony to the group. Nobody was really very into harmony, but my dad, with this Jim Max Jazzman, he'd always sat me and my brother down and said, this is harmony, da-da-da, da-da-da. And he'd shown us that, and we'd had a little bit of... So when we came to do the group, I'd say to him, let's do a harmony on that one, and we gradually worked our way into things like that. George was serious, quiet, always a very good businessman. George was always very good on the business side, and always very good on his instrument. I don't think he was very innovative till later. But he was a good, solid musician there with a good, solid sense. He was very sensible, George, still is. Sensible guy, which was very helpful. So he kind of added that to the package. So he sort of had wit and sort of integrity. Wit with John, commerciality with me, sort of seriousness and an ability with George. And Ringo was the best drummer in Liverpool. That's what Ringo was. And Ringo had wit, again, native wit. He's still a very funny man, Ringo. Ringo didn't know when he was being funny, which was always great, because those of us who'd sort of been to grammar school knew how the phrases slung together. 3 of us went to grammar school. Ringo didn't. Ringo always said he only went to school for 3 days. Because he had a bad operation when he was a kid. He had peritonitis. His stomach's got a lot of scars on it. And his parents were told he'd die age 3. Oh. So with Ringo, everything was always a bonus. And he literally didn't go into school, spend all his youth in hospital with peritonitis, recovering from this stuff. So thanks. So Ringo's a very good University of Life guy. He always had masses of that. But he'd say to us, we'd say, good God, that was exhausting. That was an exhausting day yesterday. He said, oh, God, he said, it really has been a hard day's night. We go, what? What did you just say then? He said, say that again. It's been a hard day's night. And he thought he meant it. In fact, quite a few titles came. Tomorrow Never Knows was another of his. He said, well, tomorrow never knows. I said, I'm sure that's not the real saying, but it's better. Let's write that one down. So that would be... Ringo said titles. He talked in titles all the time. We go, ding, because we were maybe a little more literate than Ringo was, although he's caught up a lot now.
People say about you, too, that you had a sense of discipline, showmanship, public relations.
Yeah, they say that about me. I think that's true. Yeah, I think that is true. I had a steadier upbringing than certainly John and Ringo. Certainly John. The others all had nice upbringings, actually. John was a little unfortunate. It was a nice upbringing. It was a little unfortunate because his mum died when he was young and his father left home when he was 3 and stuff. So John had a kind of... He lived with his aunt. So I think that was a lot of the reasons for John's mixed-up periods. It was a little... When your father leaves home at 3, you're not on a good thing. You know, it's going to give a little boy a problem there. But, yeah, my family was... very interesting, very incredible kind of family. Like sort of, it was very working class. My dad had left school when he was 14, like everyone did then, and gone straight into work. And he'd always been a cotton salesman, actually, my dad. But he was the kind of man who wanted to improve himself all the time. So he did crosswords, and he was very good at crosswords. And actually, one of the great things that's happened, and he died in 76, so he doesn't know about this. But my cousin, who grew up with me, my dad would always say, crosswords. Learn crosswords, son. Do crosswords. Very good for your word power and all stuff. He was a great man. Lovely man, my dad. Besides being a musician, he was this word man. And he'd say to us, do this. Now, my cousin actually has just become the very first man to ever do the crossword for the Times. He writes the things. He makes them up. And these English crosswords are not easy. Daily Telegraph, Times and The Guardian. My cousin... The 3 hardest crosswords in Britain. And he credits my dad with being the guy who turned him and said, learn crosswords. I was the only guy in school who could spell phlegm. P-H-L-E-G-M. To this day. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, I had this kind of wonderful upbringing where, when it came to showbiz, I sort of knew that all people wanted was to have a bit of fun and a good time, like at the parties we'd had as kids. The family parties. I knew people wanted to laugh, a nice bit of music, a good song, you know. I knew the older people wanted a little tearjerker, and, you know, I just somehow I knew all that stuff, whereas some other people didn't seem to know it as clearly as I did. So it was a kind of showbiz sort of thing in me, I guess through my dad.
I talked to Peter Asher, and he said that at a certain point you guys felt that Brian Epstein really didn't know any more than you did about managing, but he was there, and that was it.
I think towards the end of Brian's stint, that was true, because how it happened in the Beatles is we were first of all discovered, and it was they that made the records, and we just turned up, sang, then went to the pub. As things progressed, because we were bright young lads, we started to say, what's that? What are you doing there? Oh, you're putting tinniness on it, are you? We wouldn't know it was called top or treble. We wouldn't know any of the words. Bass. Oh, yeah, treble. Oh, that's what that stuff's called. Yeah, put a bit more of it on. Try a little more. No, the rule book. Try a bit more. And we pushed the barriers that way. So we got a lot of techniques out of doing that. Like phasing was one of the big techniques. Automatic double tracking. Things that are accepted now, that are a part of studio equipment now. We kind of made them up just saying things like, you know when a radio goes funny and it goes... We say, why does that happen? He'd say, well, it's because the waves are phasing. We said, it'd be great if we could get that on the guitar, you know. So we did a lot of experimentation, which has now become kind of established procedure now. So we were always pushing. We were always just inquisitiveness. And what happened was, in all of those things, then eventually, we had seen how Brian had done it. What is there to managing? You look after the interests, you hire gigs, you make sure the right people are together. So I think after a while we did feel we knew as much as him. Not in the early days. He was our Svengali in the early days, very much. And we were very happy to have him, and he was a great man. Don't anyone, some of these crummy books come out, tell you he was this and that, and he was not good for us, or he's lousy, or we didn't like him. It's fantastic. We all love Brian. A lovely man. Lovely man. He was a failed actor. That was, and I actually always credit him with one of the things. Another thing behind this Beatles' irresistible force was that being bright guys, if we'd have just come down straight like a normal group, we would have just hung out with some musicians in London and gone out to the local restaurant with them or something. But because of Brian, we came in at a much higher level. Because Brian was RADA. Brian was ex-RADA, you know, the acting school in London, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. Brian had been there, and Brian loved theatre a lot. So Brian's crowd would be Coral Brown, Vincent Price's wife, and you'd be meeting great actresses, or you'd be meeting Larry Gelbart, MASH. We met Larry very early on. Oscar Buselink. We were meeting these guys who were like big kind of showbiz guys, and we'd be chatting with them at parties and enjoying their conversation, enjoying their wit. As I say, with John, who was a very funny guy anyway. John was a clever man. He wasn't clever academically because he never got a single exam in his whole life, John. I got some exams. John he couldn't get arrested as far as exams were concerned. But he was all here. You know, he'd read a lot, and he was a very intelligent guy, John.
What was the impact when it happened? This had to be a start. Were you aware of how big it was?
No, see, the great thing about it was a gradient. It was only a gentle gradient for us.
Snuck up on you?
Everybody else thought it was an overnight success. Yeah. We started off in Liverpool as nothing, just as a crummy little band. When we got this opportunity to go to Hamburg, then we started to be better than the other bands in Hamburg. We started to get a larger repertoire, started to look a little further. They started to come and visit us. The clubs in Hamburg, the very first club we ever played at was called the Indra, which is the German name for India. Indra. And we played there. The first night we played, I think there must have been 2 people in there. But we started to learn our showbiz skills, because what happened, around the door, there'd come people. It was off the street, this was the Reeperbahn, this is a tourist area. They'd come off, and the price of the beer would be there. The first thing they'd look at was the price of a beer, you know, to see whether they could have a quiet, cheap drink. And they'd hear this band, and we'd see them, we'd go, and we'd start doing show, we'd start changing the number, change quick, a better number, if we were playing something crummy. And we'd try and entice them in. This was our role in life, was to make people buy more beer. That's how we actually started off, was the more beer they bought, the more likelihood of our pay going up. So it's a fantastic training, because you actually had to get results, or else you were going to be out next week. So we did what the Germans call make show. And we put show in there, and we put a lot more repertoire. Well, by the time, after a couple of months had gone by, roughly, I think, when we finished playing in that club, we moved to another club. That club was packed out nearly every night of the week. See, so we knew we had something going. We'd managed to make an empty club packed. And Saturday night, you just could not move for like young girls and guys. And it was the crowd too. It was the people. It wasn't like to just rock and roll fanatics or something. It was the German people who were coming. They were ferrying in, and we knew we were a big success. Moved to this next club. Our crowd moved with us. This next club became the most popular club. So by the time we left that scene and came back to Liverpool, we then had to work up again. But we knew we'd been massively famous in this one little neck of the woods. We knew we'd made it. We'd seen how it's all done. We'd had all the acclaim. We'd even got a little record contract out there. Came back here. We hadn't led too much, but from where we'd started, it was a huge jump. Came back to Liverpool, started again with this repertoire to become the Cavern. When we first worked there, not many people came in. By the end of when we worked there, you couldn't get in there, and it was sweat and everything, so electrifying. I mean, the amps used to fuse with the sweat dripping off the ceilings. Used to just do in the amps. And then when that happened, you see, we then used to go a cappella, and we'd joke about the commercials. Ladies and gentlemen, a great new product has come on the market, and we'd do all this stuff. You know, we'd handle any situation. It was a fabulous training ground. It was like the older entertainers had said vaudeville was. We had our own little version of vaudeville, potted vaudeville kind of thing. So by the time we came to play the sort of big shows and the big gigs around, and by the time we went to America, we'd already been famous about 5 times in all these other little levels. So to actually, and because we'd said to Brian, we want to be number one, when we stepped off that plane in America, no matter what any journalist said to us, hey, you guys are lousy, we said, but we're number one in your country. Beat that if you can, my man. And there was no, you couldn't say anything to that. That's the one thing you cannot dispute, right? You've got a record number one now, I've got to admire you. It doesn't matter what I think of you. If your record's number one, I've got to have some respect for you. And this is what happened. We were in Paris, and the telegram came through from Capitol Records. It said, one hold your hands, gone number one. Woo, we just jumped on each other's backs, screamed the whole place down. And we knew we were off for the fame. Whilst it was kind of, wow, and amazing, in a funny way, we expected it. Not an arrogant way.
Did you feel pressure to sustain it once it was there?
Not too bad, no. I mean, we figured we'd done it 5 times there. This is the 6th. We'll do a 7th and 8th and a 9th. No problem. It was sort of, it had become part of the way we got used to it. We got used to this sort of fame. You see, okay, it was, now it would be the Plaza where the kids were outside, and there'd be more kids, and it'd be bigger, and it'd be Ed Sullivan. But in England, we'd just done it, and it'd be the Nottingham Plaza. And the kids were just as packed outside there. So it was funny. We got used to it, and we'd learned our trade by the time we got to the States. And I say, once you then started to probe, once older people would say, my God, Benny Goodman would kind of say, these guys, nothing. They'll be over tomorrow. Harold Allen and people like that did say at the time, they'll be finished. Don't worry, gang. This won't last long. But then the kids would say, what about yesterday? What about this Michelle song? That's not bad. Well, it's here, there, and everywhere. There's something here, Dad. I think that was always the kind of anchor that kind of held us there, was this musicality. We were pretty musical. Pretty good musicians, actually, in a kind of smallish way. Nobody could virtuoso solo. But as far as a good little rhythm section was concerned, we were a good little band. We could now, if we were here now, we kind of say, Long John, so-and-so, we think of a tune, a blues tune. Okay, Big Mac truck, 3, 4, boom, boom. And we'd all be in. It wouldn't be just a ham-fisted little group. Because we've been working together so long.
Did you ever have a chance to prove that live? It seemed every show I ever saw, there was a screaming from the start to the screaming at the end.
That was sometimes a great help. If you're madly out of tune, you sometimes thank the Lord for moments like that. No, we had our quieter gigs. We'd play things where people would listen. We'd often play to older audiences, which always did it. If ever you played to older audiences, they did it. But we liked all that. I mean, it was part of our fame. It was part of what we were doing. Sinatra had the Bobby Soxers, so it wasn't even a new thing.
Was it hard to be a Beatle? Is it hard to be Paul McCartney? How difficult is it?
It's not for me. No, I've had 1 or 2 moments in my life where I've kind of thought, okay, this is pressured. This is difficult. This is showbiz and at its height kind of thing. And maybe you ought to just go back to being a coil winder, whatever it used to be. But then at that point you realise, no, I can't. No matter what happens now, I can't go back. So then you think, oh, well, if that's the case, enjoy it then. Get on with it and enjoy it. There have been just 1 or 2 moments when I thought, point of no return, maybe it'd be good to sort of try. But I know that now, certainly, if I tried to now become unfamous, it'd be Garbo. He used to be famous, now look at him. I've got enough knowledge to know that that's what it'd be like Brigitte Bardot. It'd be, she once was beautiful, now look at her. So, I figured the only way to crack that was just stay there. Don't go and hide, just stay in one form or another. So, I kind of branch out occasionally and do things, that keep me interested, like the Linda thing and stuff. And now I've got my own studio, I can experiment with some stuff, and I enjoy working with people. It's not hard for me, really. I feel, it's a bit the showbiz cliche, but I really do feel quite lucky to be able to do this and get
Peter
paid.
Asher had said that when he was over at Apple, and you could see the demands on you guys.
That was a difficult period.
Heads of state, to do this, to be there. That had to be...
Marcos, there was a big Marcos incident that we didn't realise we were getting involved in. Yeah, there was a lot of that. But that was a very difficult period, Apple, because Brian had died, which had left us in the lurch, because, as I say, he was important to us, even though we were getting to the stage where we'd say to him, we want to do this, and he'd carry it out. We weren't reliant on him. But when he went, he left a hole, left a gap.
What were the dreams? What did you want Apple to be?
We wanted Apple to be a very successful company which would be able to have a sort of more charitable feel to it than big businesses became. We always felt there was a sort of ugly face to capitalism, and Apple was going to be the pleasant face of capitalism. In other words, we were going to get people, pay them very, very well, but corner the market kind of thing in all these great artists that we'd attract to us. It would always have to be very, very good music, or something we liked. And it was going to be business with pleasure was one of our sort of ideas at the time, one of the dreams. Was instead of life inevitably having to become a grind, where people sit and, oh my God, this is my job. We felt it could be very pleasurable and stuff. The dreams were good. And what we did as the Beatles during Apple was good. We did a lot of good work. You know, we had one of our first releases was Hey Jude and stuff. We had Long and Winding Road and Let It Be, and a lot of very good things came out of all of that. So our side was all right. I think what let us down really was the business people we employed. We as artists, we sort of said, well, you get that side of it together. We'll hire people and we'll get the artists and we'll do that. And that side of it, I say, was pretty successful as a record.
You came out of the box with Mary Hopkins, with
Mary,
other records.
Yeah. We had other successes too, yeah. Sure. We had James Taylor's first record. But it was a beneficent kind of company. It was to be a company where you could feel safe. And I say what let it down was the business side. But I mean, we had a clothes shop, for instance. The idea was that we had a clothes shop. And when we decided we didn't want to be in clothes, instead of sell them all off cheap, which we thought was a bit crummy, we gave it all away. That was the sort of way we wanted to be. It wasn't totally naive, because you know, it wouldn't have been that much money saved if we'd. It was just the philosophy behind it. We wanted it to be a modern company. I've seen companies that have put that same idea into practice and are very, very successful. I'd say Sony. It's a similar thing. If you talk to Mr. Sony, he's got an idea that it's a family, that they should be happy, that money isn't everything, they should like their jobs, they should enjoy coming in on a Monday. That was all of that we were trying to get to. I still do. I think my company at the moment exists very like that. The people I have, you know, are all well paid, not asked to do too much. If they are, I'll kind of ask them rather than tell them. And we treat them like humans, and I get a lot back from it. They give me an awful lot back. They'll work much later than anyone will work. And you know, they're happy to go to work.
I want to ask you, next year is the 20th anniversary of the Sgt. Pepper album,
yeah.
Maybe the most analyzed record, analyzed, scanned stuff,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
forth. That was a radical departure. Was it input from everybody in terms of how that was recorded and the breakthroughs you had?
It was really, yeah. We all were in on it. I think on that album, I don't like to kind of say I had a lot to do with it, because it does sound like me ego tripping.
No, especially.
Well, it does, but I mean, but you know, sometimes if that's the case, then you just. So I mean, what happened was I got an idea coming back from America. I was on a Pan Am flight, I think, and I got this idea to pretend we weren't us. I felt we were getting in a bit of a rut as the Beatles. The pressures you're talking about certainly did exist. I always felt, well, you know, you've got to handle them, and I just handled them. I figure, you know, you're a baseball player, you're going to get some flack, you've got to handle it. So I was never too bothered by that, but I knew we had pressures. So to relieve what pressures there were, I hit upon this idea of saying to the group, this album, we are not the Beatles. This is going to be our safety valve. We're going to think up a new name for ourselves, going to think up a new way of being, a new way of recording, a new everything, just to be fresh. So I said, and I've written this song, by the way, which says Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And that was in the style of things at the time, you know, so-and-so's travelling medicine show with Dr. Foote. You know, everyone was having those sort of zany Mr. Bojangles, all-electric rhythm and blues outfit with pants on. You know, it was long, complicated titles. So this was our one, which kind of set the vogue a bit. And I just said to everyone, we're not the Beatles. It's one thing. Whenever we go in now to make this record, it's not John having to sing this track. You can be anyone. It was to liberate us. So it was quite good, you know. We did stuff that we'd never done before. And John and I think, were the main influences on it. George took a lesser role in that particular one. He was into his Indian music, so he did his Indian track. And that was all him. It was all his sort of innovation. And Ringo came along as usual, for the ride, as it were.
You guys were never a songwriting team like Arlen and Mercer or Bacharach and David. I mean, you didn't write all the songs together. Who did?
We did. No, we did everything. We always got frightened of one thing: establishing a formula. Because everyone said to us, "How do you do it? What's the formula?" We said, "Well, if we knew that, we'd bottle it and sell it. It'd be terrific." But that was a kind of facetious way of saying we actively discouraged finding a formula. Because once you find it, it's a very elusive thing, all this stuff. It's like magic. You find a formula to write, tear it up the next time you go to write. I've heard a lot of good people say this, de Kooning, painters like this. The minute you know how to paint, take a week off. It's wrong. There's something going wrong. To feel too smug about it. So what we used to do was, we did it 3 ways. Either we'd sit down with nothing and 2 guitars, nearly always 2 guitars, which is always, I still think, is a very good way to write with people, because it's like a mirror. You can see what he's doing, he can see exactly what you're doing. You get ideas off each other. It's better than the mirror, because it's another person mirroring what you're doing. So it's good. You're plonking away in D, and you can see where his fingers might go. And it suggests directions and stuff. 3 ways we wrote. Either just sitting down over 2 acoustics with a blank piece of paper, and we'd write from the ground up, of which there were a number of songs. I think She Loves You was one of them, From Me to You. A lot of earlier songs, This Boy. Most of them, a lot of them were written like that. Then there would be the other way, which would be one of us would have an idea. I remember I used to drive out to John's house. He lived in the country, I lived in London. I'd drive out, and I remember the chauffeur once said, I said, had a good week? He said, oh yeah, he said, I'm very busy. He said, at the moment, he said, I'm working 8 days a week. And I thought, 8 days a week, there's a title. So when I got to John's house, I said, 8 days a week. So that was the second way, where one of us would have a concept, and then we both sit down and write it together. Norwegian Wood was like that, where John just had the first idea. I once had a girl, or should I say, she once had me. That was John's. And then I arrived, and we finished it, and all the burning of the flat and the wood and all this idea, I sort of started to throw in, and it all got a bit more bizarre when the 2 of us got on it. Something like In My Life, again, would be John's idea, and I'd write the melody to it for him. So we did it every which way. So that first it was either just 2 of us with a blank sheet of paper. Second method was one of us would have the germ of an idea, and then the 2 of us would finish it up. Or the third method was that each of us would have the germ of the idea separately and not be going to see each other for a week and be too hot to stop, like Yesterday. A lot of my ballady stuff I wrote on my own, not particularly with John, like Yesterday, Michelle, Long and Winding Road, Let It Be, Ellen Rigby. A lot of that kind of stuff that I'm sort of more known for would just be me sitting at home, Lady Madonna and some stuff like that, Fool on the Hill. And then I'd always take it, like Ellen Rigby, I remember taking it to John's and saying, I need a third verse. So it was every which way. We worked completely together in the accepted way of doing it, and we were always very happy to keep it very loose, so that there never was a formula.
In the split and the breakup, were creative differences ever a factor, or was it all the external stuff, the other things?
I think creative differences may have been a minor factor, but it would be very much a minor factor, because nearly always we liked what we brought each other. I always liked John could spot a bum line, which I always found very beneficial. One of our very early songs, I Saw Her Standing There, which opens up, she was just 17. And this is when we were 18 or something, so we were writing about. This is way back before we'd hardly written anything. The lyrics, we didn't understand about lyrics then. It was just because anything rock and roll. Chuck Berry was the best lyricist around anyway for rock and roll at the time, and we tried to write like that, but we couldn't do it. He was just. I still think Chuck's a monster lyricist for what he did. Amazing. I love some of his stuff. Memphis, Tennessee, and stuff. It's just clever stuff. It's in.
Teachers teaching the golden rule.
There's some very good stuff there. It's rock and roll and stuff, and it's not obviously as establishments, but it's very clever stuff. But we did a song. She was just 17, and my second line was she'd never been a beauty queen, and John went, "Ooh," and that would be the kind of benefit he would wince at a bad line like that. And we go, "Oh well, what do you reckon?" And we'd come up with something better, and it ended up she was just 17. You know what I mean? Which became a big kind of catchphrase. Mamas and Papas put it in one of their songs then later. You know what I mean? It was like, very in little phrase. It became picked up by a lot of people. But that was certainly better than Beauty Queen. Do you know what I mean? So John would do that. And I'd do that with his stuff too. We were very good at editing each other's work. So right up until the break, with the group, one of the very last things we did together, he would call me in and kind of, we'd just sort of finish off the thing, and he wanted to record with me and stuff. So the creative things weren't really the problem at all. In fact, I think we were always very happy with that. We, occasionally we'd disagree. But the good thing about the Beatles, it was if there was a veto, if anyone vetoed it, the idea went, which is a good idea. It wasn't majority rule, which it got to be later. With the business stuff, it got to be 3 votes to 1. There was always one person annoyed at the decision. Whereas earlier days, and creatively, it had always been, if Ringo said, I can't play to that. I'd be like, oh, what's wrong with it? And we'd change it to suit him. So it was very good. If there was anything problem about it, one of us would spot it, and then it would be changed. So by the time it arrived on the market, it had pretty much been snagged down. It pretty had quality control done on it, by each one of us. We're all, Ringo's a big blues, country and western fan, and he knows his kind of Bill Monroe's and his Jimmy Rogers, and he knows his early stuff. He's very early blues imports, Ringo. So, he knows kind of good music and stuff, and he'd veto stuff if it sounded a bit soppy or wasn't good. John was, say, more literate. Here, it shouldn't have been, because he didn't pass any exams. Like I say, he never did anything, but he just was. So you had a lot of influences kind of vetoing all this stuff and fixing it before it ever got out.
You haven't had any of that, have you? Or have you since?
Since then, no. That's not really. No, I do miss it. Yeah, it's very hard to replace someone like John. Should I say impossible? I mean, the relationship we had coming as kids together. So, I mean, I've worked with other people, and I've had some fun with other people and stuff, but I think probably the best stuff I've done since the Beatles has been stuff I've just done on my own, which wasn't different from how we used to work. In my yesterday kind of phase, I've sort of done stuff like My Love and Mull Kintyre and a couple of things that have been quite popular, Maybe I'm Amazed and stuff like that I think stacks up with the Beatles stuff. But co-written stuff, obviously, I don't think it's been anywhere near as good, because, well, you're really only talking 4 people. Denny Lane, who obviously to me was nowhere near as good as John. Stevie Wonder, who's very good but not lyrical. He's not a lyricist, Stevie. He's a great musician, a great groover and a great magic musician, obviously. And Michael Jackson, who I don't think is as much a writer as he is a performer. And then Eric Stewart recently, who again is good, but he's not as good as John. He's written some nice songs. He wrote "I'm Not in Love," which is a big hit for 10cc. It's very good.
There had to be some insecurity and trepidation when you went off to start your own career by yourself.
Yeah, a lot of it really. I can't believe some of the stuff we did. I mean, Linda and I look back at it and I said, God, did we do that? I mean, it must have been mad. But we did a lot on intuition. I basically knew I didn't want to retire aged 30. I figured I had a couple of years left in me, and I didn't like the idea of getting out of the music business, but it was a question with the Beatles to follow that. Virtually impossible. You can't follow an act like that. You can't just come up the next week. So I decided to go back to square one. It was all instinct. It's like a homing pigeon. They don't know why they do it, but they just do it. I just got a band again, and it wasn't even a top level band. It was just like we'd started with the Beatles. It was just a little band. Got the wife in on keyboards. She barely knew middle C. Unbelievable what we did. But I mean, we were just young, in love. We thought, what the hell? It's nothing to do with them anyway. We're going to have fun. So we got up there, and I mean, I amazed myself that we had any success. By the time we came to 76 and toured America, we had a monster tour in America. By then, we'd learned more, and we were... But yeah, that was very insecure. I mean, I almost don't remember the 70s. It was so insecure. I remember the 60s quite well. And the 80s are all right. 70s is like a big blank for me. Did they ever exist? What was I doing? I don't know. What was I doing in the 70s? I can't think. But, I surprised myself. Because of all the insecurities, I think I tended to go along with a lot of critics and stuff. And so my opinion was always, I was good in the Beatles, crummy in all that stuff, and now I'm kind of doing one or two things that are all right. That's sort of how I'd put a blanket thing on it. But what I do is I amaze myself. I look in some of these books, and I see what I did. There's a record, they always get these Billboard book of hits. I was looking through one with David Bowie the other night, a couple of months ago. And he was looking, we looked up everyone else except ourselves. I said, come on, David, who are we kidding? Let's look ourselves up. That's who we want to look up. Damn this, don't go looking up James Brown. We're interested in what James did, but... And when I got to my segment, a lot of the what I thought was the crummy period, unproductive period, was very successful. It was very successful. And there's some stuff in there that I think will be found. I think with the insecurities, what happened with me, I think laziness crept in. So there's a lot of songs in there that are like half finished. There are good ideas, but I don't realise them. I cop out around about the third verse. It's a bit like kind of unfinished paintings and stuff. But I say, looking back on it, there are some things. I mean, I met Liza Minnelli, and I think her favourite song of mine is a post-Beatles song called "Maybe I'm Amazed," which is a strange little song. It's a powerful little song. I don't know if you know it, but it's it's a weird little song. Maybe I'm amazed at you. You hang me on a line. You pull me out of time. I mean, I know what I'm talking about, but it's not straightforward. So overall, I've now reached a point where I think, well, listen, kid, you've done real good. You're a good guy. You did fabulous. Even the times in your terrible insecurities, you were all right. You were hanging in. So I kind of ended up giving myself a bit of a break. I'm easier on myself than I used to be.
And when the acclaim is not there, when critical reviews are less than favourable, you're able to ride it.
No, it still makes me thick. Still makes me thick. Yeah, no, I don't know anyone who can ride that stuff. Do you? Nobody. There's only one answer: don't read it. And then what happens is you're sitting in the dentist and you pick up Newsweek, and there it is. And you've got so unused to reading this stuff, you've got no shell around yourself, and it's terrible. But I don't think anyone likes... I liken critics sometimes to teachers in school. I don't think anyone likes a bad report. No one likes to do badly in an exam. That's how I feel. So I can't get off on it, no matter how constructive they are. If they still say McCartney could do better if he concentrated, I don't go for it. They're teachers, And I just say, voila. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Look over, and Lynn's got a kind of glazed look in her eye.
Frozen.
It's gone. It's all gone. She's totally corpsed, the whole thing. So the audience go giggle. They think it's in the act. Yeah. They like this. They're going for this. They think this is clever. This is good the way they've done. So I then think, right, what the hell are we going to do here? So I wander over to Linda. Einstein, just a moment. It's like Lauren and Hardy. Just a moment. I can't remember. They've gone from me too. Bloody hell. And the audience by this time is getting off on this. They think this is like the husband and wife act. This is the best bit of the show. So anyway, suddenly she pushes me out the way and she's remembered them, and off we go. But we had plenty of moments like that. Oh. But I say, looking back on it, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. I think it's great that we kept going. It would have folded anyone else. Many people just would have not bothered after that. Because I say, we always knew it was not the easiest act to follow. But so I just thought, well, I want to stay in sort of show business. I want to stay in singing. I want to stay in music. The only way is to keep practiced. I can't lay off for 3 months and then have to do a vocal. I'm going to be out of... So I've got to sing every day, or I've got to sing nearly every week or something. So we just got a little band. Started doing it again.
You came up with a great answer to Bob Hilburn on a TV thing. In fact, I flashed out a few other people when he said, hey, some of your records aren't that great, the critics aren't. And you said, you give it the best shot you can. And
isn't it true?
It's there.
It's true. You look at anyone's career. There's valleys, there's mountains. I remember looking at Sinatra. Sinatra took some of the biggest valleys going, right? He was just a dead duck. Now he's good old Frank, and he's still revered. So I always thought that, it panics you at first, because you don't have the sense to realise that at first. You think, it's a dip. I just done a movie, didn't do well. I start to relax. You think, okay, it's not the first movie hasn't done well. Why didn't it do well? I understand why. Director had never made a feature before. I wrote the screenplay. It was the first draft. No one did a second, third, fourth. Which I can see now what we should have done. So I try and just sort of rationalise it out and just say, well, maybe the next one we'll hit it, And you hear so much of that. Spielberg's pictures, he can't get arrested, and then suddenly he's in his flavour of the month, and then everything he does turns to gold. I mean, I look at my whole career, and luckily I've done a lot. Luckily I got a lot of peaks where I can say, well, you didn't do bad, kid. And I can kind of look at it all now and sort of say, you've done all right.
Perspective.
And even if I do nothing from now on in, which I intend not to do, I intend to still do. I'm still looking to write my best song soon. Won't be long. You know, I still want to outdo yesterday myself, certainly. And it's all here, you know, I still feel like I will. I feel like I've hardly begun. In fact, Lee Eastman, he says, you only just started, Paul. Because he sees things for me. He's a great guy, Lee.
Anybody you'd like to record with, any project you'd love to take on if the world was wide open to you?
Not immediately comes to mind. There are things that come to mind occasionally, you know, and I think of. There are lots of interesting areas. I remember being, I think it was coming up to 30. It must have been like about 27 or something. I could kind of look for these dates, but I'm a bit hazy on dates. I've never been a person I'm not that kind of organised type person. I'm a bit more flaky, artistic. I feel I have to be creative. I have to let a few areas not be like, you know, so I'm not too good on dates and stuff. But around about the time of Eleanor Rigby, which I roughly think I'd be about 25, 26 or something but then. I remember thinking, what are you going to be doing when you're 30? Because 30 seemed like an unseemly age to be gallivanting around. I thought I ought to be a little more sensible. Still hasn't happened, by the way. But I did look at that age and think, well, you know, you ought to do something that looks becoming, you know. And I thought, serious music. Why not? Fabulous. Why not move away from kind of pop and move into stuff, move into music as such? Because, I mean, my particular thing I find easy is melody. I mean, I've never been stuck on melody. Words I get stuck on. I don't think of myself as the greatest lyricist. I think I've written some great lyrics. But I don't think it's my main skill. Through my dad, I think melody has always been very easy for me. I mean, I wrote the tune to When I'm 64 when I was 16, and the words to it when I was like 23. I mean, there was that big a gap between things. So, like I say, I think that comes easily to me. So that then suggested to me, I thought, well, that would be kind of seemly, and it would be something you could do when you're 90. You can still be writing little notes and writing little quartets and little pieces and Gershwin in it and doing this. So there's a hell of a lot of it. There's a huge field there. I mean, if I ever get started on that, I mean, you know.
Up to this point in your career, because there's obviously more to come and you're going to try and if you could put 6 months or a year in a bottle and put it on a shelf, then when you are 90, pull it down off the shelf and say, that I'd like to live again. You got a time frame that you can...
No, I'm not very good with dates. I mean, all I would think would be the first flush of Beatles success. Sort of, I don't know, it will be in the first couple of years after the first number one, when things were very simple. You know, the song Try to Remember, that kind of thing, the early Beatles days, when the lyrics of that are great. I just got a great version of it the other night. What are the lyrics? Try to remember the kind of September when mellow and things were all very tender and simple. You know, that kind of... Well, early Beatles success was very simple and uncomplicated, and we hadn't learned about taxmen yet, and we hadn't learned about tax shelter schemes and all of that, and the music was flowing nicely. Some of the early albums, I think, around about Rubber Soul, Revolver, it was quite a nice period. But I've been lucky. There have been a lot of good periods. It would be very difficult to just take that out, because then I got to come up to Sgt. Pepper, and that was one hell of a period. Completely different, like another lifetime. We were like different people by then. Because of the drugs thing, you have to remember, in the 60s, there was this new thing, which had always been there with musicians, the jazz musicians and stuff. But we'd just become introduced to it through the sort of the hippie kind of thing that was happening then. And Sgt. Pepper owes a lot to drugs, to pot and stuff. That was us getting into that. It was rather innocent. Compared to what you talk about these days, it was very innocent. It was never seriously heavy stuff. Things got heavier later, with one or two of us, but then it was quite mild. It was like a drink. It was nothing. It was never lethal. It was never that crazy. We were never sort of out of it on the floor like you'd hear about Stones sessions where they couldn't wake the guitarist up, and it was never that. We were always just a little bit sort of merry or whatever it was, but it certainly made our minds go, yeah, we could do that. Wow, look, if we can do that, why couldn't we do that? And possibilities started to come in like mad. So that was a very rich period for that. I mean, lyrically, there's a thing, a song called Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, which is on Sgt. Pepper, which is one people liked a lot of the time. Now that was actually taken down off a poster, something that we would have never seen that had it not been for the frame of mind we were in, where all things would become impossible. They said it was mind expanding, and that was the kind of thing we were getting into at the time. We were sitting in John's house, we were writing for Sgt. Pepper, and he just said, "Look at this poster, look at this. Being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, Pablo Fanke's Fair, Somersaults, Henry the Horse." So we just read the whole thing down and just wrote lyrics to the whole thing. And a song called Paperback Writer, I suddenly had the idea to write a letter to a newspaper. And the original lyrics of Paperback Writer, I don't know where they are, I might have them in a drawer somewhere. They're written in the form of a letter, because the lyrics start off, "Dear Sir or Madam." And then there's a comma, and you go to the next line, and then the lyrics start. And it's just written as a prose letter. "Dear Sir or Madam, as the case may be, I can make $1 million for you overnight, and so on, so on, I'm writing paperbacks, and so because I want to be a paperback writer." I could, and it's those kind of ideas, instead of just writing in those came out of just kind of letting ourselves go a little further. Danger is always not to go too far, and it did eventually reach a point where we found we were going too far. We had to kind of rein in, which is a danger. I mean, any kids listening to this, I'm not meaning to imply, reading this book, I'm not meaning to imply that, hey kids, take drugs and get high and you'll write great music. It's not that. It just was a contributory fact at that time.
And it was innocent.
But while it was innocent, it was fine. It was just like someone having their first beer. And they go, "Wow, I love this piece of music." And they hear it for the first time. We all know that. And then you just allow parts of your mind work that didn't work before. So that was quite a rich time. Meeting the Queen for the first time was all very rich. Going to America for the first time was incredible. Unbelievable. God. I mean, now I wouldn't be very impressed going down Florida now and sort of seeing a motorcycle cop. But then, it was like heaven. And we'd be riding along and a motorcycle cop would kind of breeze up on his bike. Taking photos of everything we were. It was magic, But I'd say we did have a lot of good times in the Beatles. We were only going for 10 years, which is kind of surprising. It felt like it was much longer than that. From beginning to end, A to Z on the Beatles thing is only a 10-year period, really. Boy, did we come a long way in 10 years. So, I mean, we literally came from the back streets of Liverpool to the front streets of America, to the front row in America, that we got right up there, and beyond, And as you said, no British people had ever done that before. So that was the answer to long way round to your other question, which was why was there a boom? Why was the floodgates opened? Was that once one British act had made it, unlike these Cliff Richards and Tommy Steeles, once one British act had actually gone and opened those gates, the Bastille was broken, and it left the room for all the other revolutionaries who then came in on this big boom. Then Dave Clark, Stones, but there was a nice atmosphere at the time. We got the Stones their first record contract, a fact that they do not publicise these days.
Was there much rivalry between them?
No, there wasn't any. That's what I mean.
There wasn't.
There really wasn't. It was very, very sweet, actually. There still isn't, I don't think. I mean, Mick and I just don't see much of him now because he lives all over the place. But then, no, it was very sweet. In fact, I say, the guy who turned down the Beatles at Decca in England, a guy called Dick Rowe, poor guy. God, there's a guy to feel sorry for. He had to live with that till he died a few years ago. He had to always live with that. He's the man in the record business who turned him down. But he was worried that he realised he'd turned us down. So Decca, who were as big a company as the one we signed with EMI, were in shtick. He was in big trouble, hot water, because we were just... And if you look at EMI's earnings, it kind of goes, got the Beatles, and just goes. And then lost the Beatles contract, taken over by Thorne. It really coincides so amazing.
Oh, yeah. Never has recovered.
Never has recovered. So, obviously, we had that. Decca didn't have anything. And I think it was George who was at a party where Dick Rowe was, or one of the Decca guys, who said, "Hey, do you know anyone? You know, we've got to get a hot actor." And George said, "There's a great group called the Stones. You really ought to go." And he sent them down to the Station Hotel in Richmond where they were playing. And we used to hang out with them a lot. No, it was a very nice scene, actually. Very friendly scene.
It was a wonderful scene here in the 60s.
It really was nice. It was very friendly and very nice scene.
Bag of Nails.
That's where Linda and I met.
Bag of Nails.
Bag of Nails. Yep.
Well, thank you.